Hello, my name is Shane, and I am the owner of this 36-foot Penta Peugeot Mahe Evolution catamaran. It's a 2011 model, and it has Volvo D130 engines in it with Saildrive legs. And the problem that I have right now is that my port Saildrive leg has a bad prop shaft seal, and that's allowing water to get into the transmission and mixing with the oil. And when that happens, you check your oil and you'll see a kind of a milkshake, chocolate milkshake colored oil, which is a sign that you have water in your transmission. My starboard prop shaft seal is good, the oil looks perfect, but since I had to pay to put the boat up on the hard, I'm going to replace both seals. And I'm going to show you today the replacement process for replacing the prop shaft seals. That port prop shaft seal failed. It's been 2 years since I replaced these, and so I'm pretty sure I know what the cause is. I'm going to show that to you in detail later on. Also the cure that I have for it. This is a noisy yard. There's a lot of activity going on right now. The travelers is just carrying a yacht right past my boat here. So I'm filling this first part inside the cabin with the doors closed so that we have good acoustics. And when we do the work and we film it outside, I won't do much talking, probably because it won't be heard anyway. I'll do voiceovers if that's necessary. And then just another matter, little housekeeping thing, is that since the catamaran, I have two prop seals to replace, and I'm going to fill them both. And if it turns out that I have some bad video, something that's not clear because of the lighting or whatever from one side and it's better for the other side, I'll show that work shot from the other side. I'll try to have the same camera angle for both so it's not so confusing. Removing the bearing seal retainer is fairly simple. The bearing seal retainer is only held in by 2 Allen bolts, and it has 2 oil seals in it, one that faces towards the water and one that faces towards the oil. So one seal holds out the water and the other seal holds in the oil. Removing that retainer is fairly simple. It only takes a couple of tools. What you got to have first is an Allen wrench. An Allen wrench right here to remove the central nut on the prop spinner. A nice strong screwdriver with a 1/4 inch shaft that you can put through the spinner to get it loose and spin it off. Then your propeller will come right off. And then the next task after that will be to remove the anodes. That's fairly simple. And then the next task after that is to remove the bearing seal retainer. Now, I've seen other people in other videos remove that bearing seal retainer, and the way they do it is they take a straight bladed screwdriver and they use a hammer and they force it in between the bearing seal retainer and the straight face of the Saildrive leg. But since the Saildrive leg is all made out of aluminum, it gouges up pretty easily. And so rather than damage that mating face, what I do instead is use a slide hammer. You may have seen one of these before in an auto body shop, or maybe you saw it in the movie Gone in 60 Seconds, which tells you how old I am. But what I do with it is I have a bolt here that will fit in the central spinner nut hole of the prop drive shaft, and I put it in the slide hammer chuck. I screw that into the drive shaft, the propeller drive shaft, and then I just slide this back 3 times is about all it takes to pop it loose, and you've got it free. Replacing the seals from inside the bearing retainer is a little more involved. I'm going to do that in the shop, and I'll show you that. And at that point I will also show you the wear that we have on the prop shaft, which I believe to cause the failure of the oil seals, and what I'm going to do to change it. So if you're ready, let's go. Oh, one more thing, we can't go yet. You also need a bucket to catch your oil when you pop that bearing, that seal retainer free, because I'm not going to drain the oil ahead of time. The oil is going to come out. You need to have a bucket to catch that oil. And then I have two boxes here that mark port and starboard, and when I take out the transmission shaft, the propeller drive shaft, out from each one, I will put it in the properly marked box so that I don't get them confused, and this way I can keep them clean. Hi, this is Editing Shane from the future. I've looked at all the videos and I realized a couple of things, so I'm going to talk about it now before you see the rest of the work sequence. I did say that I would use the best shots of the work to replace the Saildrive bearing and seal retainer seals, but it worked out a little differently than that. When I took apart the starboard drive, it went great. When I took apart the port drive, however, there was a problem, and the problem was that there's a spacer collar on the propeller drive shaft that had to be removed. It should slide off, and you need it off before you can pull the bearing and seal retainer off. But it wouldn't come off. I wrestled with it for about 5 minutes, and then I decided to just take the whole assembly, that is to say the bearing seal retainer housing and the prop shaft, to the shop, and then get that troublesome spacer collar off at the shop, and then go back to work. I thought about leaving that out, but I find that's what's most interesting to me in videos is when people have problems and how they solve those problems. So even though it was unexpected, I included it, and you will see how I solved the problem. So now let's get back to work.
It was like, and then like it didn't even splash on my leg. It just soaked into this perfect ball of water.
Up. Here's the bearing, the seal retainer, not the bearing retainer, the seal retainer. Well, it does hold the outer race of the roller bearing. And there's your prop drive shaft. And that's all there is to pulling the retainer seal. And that's all there is. Now, if you look at this oil, you can see that it's pretty clean oil. Doesn't have any signs of water in it. That's the other side that has the water leakage problem. Get a rag to shove in there so we don't drip out anymore. Then we'll go over and do the same thing on the other side. Anodes look okay. I'll reuse them. These don't have to be very tight because there's a double O-ring on the retainer that actually holds the oil in. So well, I tried. I can't get the sleeves off right now, so I just guess I'll take it off at the shop. So let's go ahead and pull it. Well, milkshake color. So now we're back in the shop. As you saw this afternoon, the one propeller shaft assembly came apart like it should, like it was a piece of cake. This one, however, had the collar stuck on there. I'm not sure why yet. And so what I had to do was take it back here, put it down on my workbench, and then there wasn't enough room here for my puller to work. So what I had to do was put it in here and pry it up with a little pry bar until I actually got it to move up. And now that I got it up, and I used a ball joint separator and a little pry bar to pull this up, because the only things that had a thin enough tip to fit in here. Now that it's up, I think I can put this guy on it. A little bit of light oil on it. Okay, we got it off. If we look at it, it has just a little bit of scoring around here. And I'll just have to take a piece of sandpaper, emery cloth, and clean that up. And I think we'll be good. And now we can get this bearing retainer off. Okay. We cleaned up the edges with a moto tool using the flapper sandpaper, so I didn't take hardly any steel off. And it now fits like it's supposed to. Okay, so now I'm going to explain what the problem is, why the seals don't last very long, and what we're going to do about it. So let's just start by the sealing arrangement. So here you have the shaft, and here you have the bearing retainer that we took off, which fits on right here. Okay? And what's inside this bearing retainer here are two seals. They're identical, and they face each other. And one, believe it or not, it's in the shop manual. The one that's towards the water has this garter spring towards the water to keep the water out. And then the other oil seal, same arrangement, is put this way with the transmission and the oil from the transmission held on this side. So the two are face to face in here on the shaft. And if you look at the sealing surfaces on the shaft right here, you can see that there are two grooves, and believe it or not, these grooves have been worn into the shaft by the rubber seal over probably about 2,000 hours worth of engine operation. And I don't think the shaft has ever been replaced. It's a 2000, the boat is a 2011. And I measured these two grooves here, and they're approximately 1/1000th of an inch deep, so they're not very deep. But they force that seal to fit into those grooves, which is not as tight a fit, and also probably those grooves are probably not very smooth, real smooth, and they're probably tearing up the seal. So just replacing the seals doesn't really solve the problem. And I knew this 2 years ago when I had the engine apart, had this apart before, but I didn't have, I needed to put it back together, and I didn't have time to make any changes. This shaft here, just the shaft, without the bearings and the transmission on it is about a $400 part from Volvo. And that's not all of it, because you have to press on the drive gear, you have to press on the bearings, and then you have to shim the gearbox and do a whole procedure to make sure this thing is right. So it's going to be a lot easier if I can just reuse the shaft. So what I came up with, so I figured out that we could actually shift these a little bit without getting in a bind. And so I had an aluminum shim made up, paid the machine shop to make it. It's a 0.120 inches thick, 120 thousandths, so essentially an eighth of an inch thick. And I'm going to put that, as you'll see, in the bottom here of the shaft housing, and then put these bearings in, these seals in, and they'll ride on a new section of the shaft. And I took the shaft and I polished up with some 2000 grit paper, so it's really smooth, and so that's what we're going to do. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to heat up this oil seal and bearing race retainer to about 300 degrees, 250, 300 degrees. It's aluminum, so it can take it. And we're going to knock out these seals, and we have to knock out this bearing race. I can't get the seals out without the bearing race. In the Volvo shop manual, it tells you to force these out with a screwdriver, but it really doesn't make sense to do that when this procedure I'll show you is actually a lot quicker and easier than trying to do that, and you're less likely to damage something. So I'm going to heat this up, and I'm going to monitor the temperature with a little infrared sensor gun here. And once it's heated up, I'm going to drive out this with this here. This is a 36 millimeter socket, and I've got a 1/2 inch drive. It's an extension, it's all beat up, so I only use it for banging on things. I will put that in here, and as you see, it fits very nicely. And I'm going to push out the bearing and retainers and the seals. Okay, so I have the roller bearing race all cleaned up. It's a taper roller bearing race, and I'm going to put it in the freezer for about 10 or 15 minutes, get it chilled down to somewhere around 7 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so here we go. Here's our seal. Our seal retainer and bearing holder, outer race bearing holder. And we're going to heat it up to about 200 degrees Fahrenheit and push in the, first we'll put this in the bottom here. That's our spacer that's going to push the seals over about 1/8 of an inch. And then we have 2 of these seals that we'll put in next, back to back. This one towards the water, and this one towards the transmission interior. And we'll put in the shims, and I'll rush inside real quick and get the outer bearing race, which is in the freezer, and drop it in. And that should do it. So let's go. Yeah, it's averaging about 200. So let's put the first one in, spring side out. Here's our drift with a 1 7/16 inch socket. Now it's got a little ways to go. Okay. Let's put the other one in. Got her spring up. It's hot there. Make sure it's seated all the way and not cocked. Looks good. Put the bearing shims in. Check the temperature. 200, 134. I'll warm it up just a little bit. Okay, get the bearing. The shims are in, yes. Tap it in a little bit. There it goes. Just cock just a little bit. Now it's in all the way, and that's it. Let it cool off. Okay, so now we have the oil seal and bearing retainer assembled, and here's our shaft with those 2 wear grooves in it, and we put it together very carefully. You don't want to cut the seal lips on the spline, so you have to be very careful when you put it together. And we slide it over the shaft here, and I can feel it that the shaft is rotating and it's not hitting the seal. It's well seated on the bearing. Well, that looks pretty good. The only thing we got to do now is paint this and we'll be ready to go. Put it back in. And by the way, I'm going to repeat this because it might not have been clear, but when I pushed out or knocked out the seals and the main bearing race, I used this 36mm socket to push everything out. Use it as a drift with that extension that I use. And then when I put them back in, I used a 1 7/16 inch socket to push the seals back in. So as you can see, I've cleaned off and coated the seal retainers with anti-fouling paint. You want to make sure that you use an anti-fouling paint that is compatible with aluminum, both for these and for the Saildrive legs. So you can't use a bottom paint that has any copper in it. So what I use is Interlux Micron CF. CF stands for copper free, but you can also use other kinds of bottom paints that are compatible with aluminum. So that's done. One of the things you want to make sure you do is that after you paint this, make sure that you scrape down the bare metal the attachment points for the anode so that you have an electrical connection between the anode and the Saildrive leg. And then all that's left to do now is to put on the O-rings on the bottom. Put the O-rings on the bottom. And we're ready to put these back on the boat. Okay, so here we are back at the boatyard. It's kind of noisy, so I'm not going to do much talking. I'm just going to put the prop shaft and the seal assembly back on. So put a little oil on the sealing surfaces. Put a little bit of oil on the O-ring seals. Put the anodes back on. Now all I got to do is fill it with oil. Don't forget the oil. Now I got to